Zane, I forgot. We should have had some pump up music playing or something for those that I think there's quite a few folks on here that know Zane already, but he is Mr. Music.
I suppose I'll wear that. I think I probably have earned
Oh,
it.
yeah.
So next time around, I'll bring some welcome music for everybody. That's a pretty good idea, Abby.
Mr. Music, Mr. Coffee. What else would you like to be known for? Mr. Masters.
Mr. Arsenal.
Sure. Yeah. For wow, I feel this is not a webinar about me, folks, but I certainly appreciate it all the same. A great week for anybody who's a fan of music and a fan of the Masters for sure, and always good to be a fan of coffee. And anybody resonating with those, great to be with you today, especially. But good to have everybody on the line here today. Thanks everybody for joining. I know, team, we were kind of letting everybody trickle into the conversation. Looks like we've really got a pretty full meeting here. Tim, should we go ahead and get started?
Let's do it. Let's kick it off. I'll just have a few housekeeping items. My name's Tim. I'm the head of marketing here at Elate. We have an awesome session for you today. With me, Zane and Abby. Zane is a senior account manager at Elate, works with a lot of people that are in the chat and on this call. Many of you know him, so he's seen a lot of plans, the good, bad, and the ugly. And so is Abby's our co-founder and COO at Elate. So she's seen thousands of plans, work with hundreds and hundreds of strategy and operations leaders, and we have an amazing session. So you guys did not join this to hear from me. I'm going to sit back in the shadows. Please use the chat, the Q&A. I'll just be moderating. We do have a full Q&A session. We'll plan on going for about 40 minutes or so, and then make sure we hit all the questions, but feel free to push those in there as we're going. And thanks to all those that submitted the questions ahead of time. So we have those as well. With that, Abby, I'm going to kick it over to you and we'll get started.
Perfect. Perfect. We are really excited, as Tim shared, for this webinar and for the full house that we've already got going here. Real quick note, Roja, I did see you post in the chat, making sure you could see just us as speakers. We do have it sectioned off just to us. We've got quite a few folks calling in where it might already be nighttime, so we went ahead and just spotlighted us. If you can't see us, let us know in the chat, but you won't be able to see everybody else in here. We wanted to give folks time to have some camera off time. With that, I'm going to go ahead and really dive us right in. When we were first talking through this webinar, this is born out of a lot of conversations, many of whom on this call may have already been a part of, but it's this topic we keep coming back to here at Elate, and specifically thinking through how do we take these two areas or two kind of functional disciplines within a business and how do we bring them together? Because so often we ourselves feel this, our customers are feeling this, some prospects we're talking to, but there is almost this like friction between project management and strategy. And one of the things that we philosophically feel is really important is that culturally within our businesses, we move beyond the task list. We go beyond just what do I need to do today, check the box items, and we really figure out why what we're doing each day matters in the long term. So that's going to be our topic here today. Zane, I'll let you run through the agenda piece, give a little bit more structure, and then we're going to dive right into it.
Abby, thanks so much. It's great to be with everyone today. Of course, grateful to be with you as well, Abby. As you mentioned, the kind of run of show for today's session, team, is as follows. First and foremost, anchoring us to the strategic planning framework that we discuss and really is woven into the fabric of each conversation that we have with prospects, with customers, with our own internal teammates here at Elate. We'll spend a brief moment there talking about the strategic planning framework and anchoring to the specific portion of that really guides our conversation today. We'll then move into really the relationship and the give and take and that balance between the project management side of the day-to-day work taking place, of course, and how that balance is and that delicate tension between project management and strategic planning and where the overlap really can be found as far as Abby and I have been able to ascertain. We're really excited to talk through a little bit more of that in more detail. We'll then move in and actually take a bit of a tour and some specific functionality within the platform here at Elate. Of course, wanted to show a little bit about how we're thinking about that, how that connection can come to life, and really how we can help strategy and operations leaders be empowered to see at the strategic level with a real finger on the pulse of what's going on at the project level. Of course, as was mentioned earlier, we'll have some Q&A as well. Really excited to address some of those questions that have come in on the front end before today's conversation. Team, certainly want to be sure that everything that's coming from Abby and I today is clear as day, and any questions that come up during the context of our content conversation today, that we're able to answer those in real time as well. A bit of a shameless plug here to pop on into the chat there. Drop any questions that you have throughout the context of our conversation today. We'll be glad to answer those toward the end, as I know Tim mentioned we'll be saving some time on the back end as well. So feel free to drop any questions that come to mind through our discussion into the Zoom chat here for our webinar. Abby, I think we can go ahead and pop into the first section of that agenda, which is, of course, the strategic planning framework. For those customers of ours, those that might know Abby and I a little bit more in depth or kind of closer working, you've probably seen this before, and I'm hopeful that this isn't new. For those that may be newer to Elate and newer to how we look at strategic planning, I wanted to orient and anchor us first and foremost to that framework. So as you're seeing here, the mission, the vision, the values, those compass items, the real highest level strategic directionalities that each of you on the call here today have one form or fashion of exposure to, really are woven within the fabric of everything. And that, of course, is going to be a common theme of our discussion today. They're woven into the fabric of those operating outcomes, the lifeblood, the enrollment numbers, the revenue for our higher ed customers, the revenue numbers, of course, those other key metrics there. We also know, of course, the themes that sort of lead up and connect that day-to-day work to those operating outcomes is extremely important. That obviously laddering down, as you see here, into those objectives, those individual focus areas cross-functionally oftentimes that lead up to those themes that then produce the results and the operating outcomes are supported by both outcomes and tactics. And that's where we're going to be living today. Outcomes and tactics. And of course, as we get into the platform, a bit of a heavy focus on those tactics as well. Of course, excited to continue and come back to this sort of spiritually through our conversation today. But Abby, I think that probably gives us a good bit of orientation. I'd like to pass it over to you before we move forward, just to be sure anything that you'd care to add or any additional color that you'd care to share regarding the framework that we've talked through before we go ahead and move into the next section of our discussion. Is there anything else on the framework side of things, Abby, that comes to mind today?
No, I think you covered it. Really, I think, again, as Zane shared, if you have talked with us, you've probably seen this slide. It is the area we always come back to because it provides that direction. But exactly as Zane shared, when we think about talking about project management and strategic planning and where we start to see those butt up against each other, and more often than not cause friction because they're not well aligned, comes to life at this purple level that we're looking at down here, the outcomes and the tactics. And as we dive into that, I want to take a moment to really talk through those two discipline areas of project management and strategic planning. And historically, when we think about project management, most people are familiar with this, right? We're talking about the milestones, the tasks that need to be done in order to move a specific thing with a start and an end date forward. We're usually thinking about a specific project team. That project management discipline is so important for a business. It is what gets things done. However, when folks try to take that discipline of project management and substitute that as strategy, what we often see are cluttered plans. We see plans that include levels far too deep for what a strategy should include. And we see teams being very siloed. There's specific people working on a project, and that's who knows about it. That's who has access to the info. And so one of the things that we want to call out from the onset is project management as a discipline is really important. However, we want to make sure we understand how this kind of Venn diagram that we're looking at over on the left comes to life. And so on the flip side of this, if we look at the strategic planning discipline within a business, what we're talking about there are ultimately the focus on your business's strategy. We're talking about that framework we were just looking at that tells us where we're trying to go, that tells us what are the bets that we're making as a business that are going to help us get there. It is the thing that guides the why behind your team. And it is incredibly cross-functional in nature. No one strategy can be run by one team. It just won't work. And so we want to make sure that level is very connected. However, where a team is maybe overemphasizing strategic planning and lacking that project management discipline, we see folks starting to try to make strategy and substitute that as project management. And what you're going to find is that too is going to fall short. that strategy is going to be too high level. It's not going to be focused on all the different items that need done. It's probably going to confuse your team because they're missing the clarity that they need with, hey, when I come in today, what are the things I need to be focused on? And so what we fundamentally believe and what we intend to spend today talking about is why these two things need to take from opposing sides of project management versus strategic planning and come together and say, hey, when these things are connected and it's project management and strategic planning, both of these disciplines exist together and are working in harmony, what we're able to do is start to marry the what needs done with why are we doing it? We need to understand what is the ultimate business impact that we're trying to make by doing these things. We need to make sure that our team has clarity on what is expected of them, how they're contributing up to the larger business. And frankly, we need to be able to be ready to be dynamic when things inevitably don't go to plan. We would love to say we've seen dozens of plans go perfectly. That's just not the reality of what we live in. Just take the last 6 months, 1 year, 5 years for those who've been in business. You're always dealing with things that are unexpected. And so the purpose of the plan is not to nail it perfectly. The purpose of the plan is to know where you're going and when you need to pivot and make sure that at the end of the day, you know what success looks like. And so that is really what we're anchoring around. That's why we believe these two things need to work in harmony. But let's talk a little bit about what the pitfalls are when these two things are really disjointed.
Abby, I think the pitfalls is certainly the right word there. Of course, when we think about really the tactical side of things, and of course that bridge to the long-term vision, oftentimes when those two are not really intrinsically connected, those two disciplines are not in harmony and in overlap, we can run into some things. And I'm sure there's folks on the call here that can attest, but when we think about the distractions, when we think about the priority fatigue and the focus that may be absent from really the day-to-day of our teammates, of our leaders, of our direct reports, that's certainly something that we want to help those on the call here today, and of course our customers, to really bridge that gap and alleviate the need to even deal with those distractions or have to reverse that priority fatigue. And ultimately, from where we sit, the key area that becomes that bridge is the impact on the business impact itself ultimately is better off for it. If tactical execution is shaking hands and making friends with long-term vision, and those two things are being able to bidirectionally work in tandem. If we can look at the long-term vision and see the tactical work that led up to that, if we can see how the tactical work that we are executing at this time, how that ladders up into long-term vision, it's beautiful music. If I could borrow the moniker that was given as the call was coming in here, I guess I am earning the title of music, not wanting to speak about myself. But I think it's really important to discuss and really get to the place of what does this even look like? What does that business impact look like? And what is the upside of having tactical execution walking right alongside and being close buddies with the long-term vision on a day-to-day basis? Abby, I know that we're going to move forward into the next phase of our conversation today, and we're going to come back to what that business impact looks like. I'm sure all those on the call here today, but Abby, from where you sit as in a previous life in the operations and strategy side of the business, of course, being our chief operating officer and living in this day to day on multiple fronts, what would you care to add there as we think about how we go about bridging that gap and what the impact of that connection might be?
I think you hit it spot on, Zane. The amount of times I feel like I hear some version of the words priority fatigue come up are multiple times a day, frankly, when we're chatting with our prospects and customers. And a lot of times I've even heard folks refer to it as we just get told the flavor of the day, like this is where we're headed today. And making sure we understand as a team why what we're doing matters is so important. And making sure that we as leaders can communicate why what our team is doing matters is so important. And so we've had this phrase going around Elate here for a number of months that really our CEO, Brooks, for those who have gotten a chance to meet him, I think you all know the way in which he sees the cultural change that can happen with this is really inspiring. And the way in which we've continued to come back to this is that at the end of the day, what we're aiming to do with this is shift strategy from just being transactional tasks and shifting that into purposeful work. We want to say, yes, it's important that we get things done, but if we are constantly measuring ourselves based on the number of boxes that we have checked in a given day, we're missing the point, and we're probably missing out on opportunities. And so that business impact is so crucial as the connective tissue, because you have to understand the things that you're doing matter for a bigger purpose. And you have to be able to understand when, hey, the things I'm doing aren't yielding those results of what matters. So should we be able to pivot? Should we change what we're doing? I use this to jump into the platform because I want to reorient ourselves almost back to that framework slide and talk through that strategy as a whole does need acted upon. We want to talk through that, but we have to make sure we're viewing everything in context. We have to understand what that long-term vision is in order to make sense of the transactional tasks and vice versa. So as I shift over into the platform itself, I'll quickly orient us. For many folks on this call, if you are a customer or a prospect, you have probably seen this, but if you have not, or it's been a minute, I'll orient us quickly. We're not going to do a full platform walkthrough. The purpose of this webinar is not a demo to sell you on Elate. We hope we put our best foot forward, certainly, but what we're going to be spending our time in the platform talking about is how this comes to life and what are some of the things that our team has been working on to bridge that gap more seamlessly. So where I am starting is on what we refer to as our main company page. Again, for those that are customers, this is very familiar to you, but what we see here is that framework coming to life. We see our mission and our vision and our values over here, setting the direction for where we want to go and saying it matters how we get there. We're going to do everything in alignment with our values to hopefully achieve this mission and vision or get closer to it. We then take that and say, okay, but for the next year or 2 years, whatever time frame we're looking at, here are the operating outcomes up here at the top. This is what we're measuring ourselves against. This is what we as a business are marching towards. Those numbers are really important. They don't always inspire your team. And so we go down into the themes right below that start to bring those operating outcomes to life. They give them purpose. They align us and orient us and create categories of work that are important over the next usually 1, maybe 2 or 3 years. And they help bucket the priorities that are most critical for us as a business. In this instance, we're looking obviously at a fake company here. They've got themes like growing their revenue, building valuable products, creating a best-in-class culture. These are going to obviously translate and look a little different depending on your business and your industry. Think of building valuable products. Think of that as really what is the offering that you have for your clients, for your customers, even those, again, in the higher ed or the nonprofit space, like what's that impact you're trying to make? As I view this is again giving us that long-term vision. And a lot of times folks have a page like this. They might even have a one-page document they printed out, strategy on a page. And it's great that your team can see that. But we don't have enough depth here for your team leaders or even your individual contributors to latch onto and say, okay, yeah, I understand how that connects to what I do. And so we want to see this start to break down into smaller components. I'm going to shift us over into this hierarchy view because I think this does a great visual way of bringing this to life. What we just did is take those 3 themes and just shifted them horizontally. We can still see everything here, but you'll start to see that there are objectives living underneath each one of these. Again, in that hierarchy or that framework that Zane showed earlier, that's what supports a theme. And then we're going to dive into the outcomes and the tactics underneath there. But if we say as a business we want to build valuable products, let's talk about how we're going to do that. If I expand this out, I can start to see the various objectives that our team or various teams are working on that contribute up. So again, we're keeping everything in context. We are not taking anything out of the strategy. Instead, we are saying it connects to the strategy in this way. And then each of these can be expanded into further. I'm going to dive into this expand our offering. And again, the example I'm showing is it might be more like revenue focused, but for your business, think about this as the impact that you're trying to make or what you're trying to offer your clients or customers. So if I expand this out, the view I'm looking at now is that objective detail view. We still have all the context over on the right-hand side of who's working on it, what teams own it, etc. But in the middle, what you're seeing here at the top are the outcomes. Those are the things that are ultimately the impact we're trying to make. When we say we're going to expand our offering, in this instance, it looks like we're trying to expand, maybe it's the regions in which we deliver into. And right now we're really heavily weighted on the central region. We want to expand out this piece of the pie in the West region and say, hey, maybe we want to have more customers in that section. Again, this is just an example, but when you think about for you all, your objectives, these outcomes are the change you want to see. They are the measurable way in which you'll say, yes, we succeeded at that, or hey, we gave it a good effort, but like maybe we fell short. Let's talk about it. Just below that, though, are going to be those tactics. You'll see there's one already in here. This is where we're going to start to spend a little bit of time and where our team has put a lot of recent development work and energy into is how do we make sure that if I am coming in and maybe I'm not a part of this objective on a day-to-day basis, but I do need to be informed about it. I need to keep an eye on it. How do I make sure that I know not just maybe the lagging indicators of what are our outcomes saying, but how do I know the work that's being done to do it is going well? For many folks, this would mean they need to go pivot into some sort of project management system, whether that's Asana, Jira, you name it, an Excel spreadsheet even, whatever that looks like. There's a lot of detail in that. What we find when these two things are not connected is that people are then having to go, one, track those down, make sure they have access, and two, they're probably getting more detail than they really know, or they really need to know, and often maybe getting some noise in there. So I'm going to take a quick pivot over into a fictional project plan that we have built. In this case, I just did it in Google Sheets, but again, maybe you're a Smartsheet user, Asana, Monday, etc. The idea here is that this is the detail that we want our team members, Leon, Kylie, Pete, this is where we want them living because they're the ones moving the ball forward on these items. This level of detail is often more than a leadership or an exec or a strategy and ops individual needs. And so what we want to figure out is how do we take this thing in this other system and connect that back into Elate so that we can see and marry these two things together. Within Elate, what we would recommend doing there is actually adding a progress bar or a tactic specific to that project. Maybe there's multiple projects working on this, you could add multiple. In this instance, I'm going to go just on this cross-functional project piece and say, let's go ahead and add a tactic. We'll just call this creatively cross-functional project progress. Maybe you have a fun name for your project. In this instance, I'm just going to keep it simple here. And what we're now able to do is say, okay, we can start to see the progress on this, but we don't want to have folks have to go into a spreadsheet or go into a project management system and come back here and type that in manually. We want to keep these things connected so that they're updating as those updates happen. And so this is where within the tactic itself, we can go into this three-dot menu and choose connect to an integration. I've already connected this sheet just to save us some time here. So I'm going to pull in from that sheet that I was just showing, and in essence, quickly tell Elate where I want to pull from. Again, there's a lot of information in here. I have a summary tab already created. So in this case, let's say I want to just say how many tasks are complete out of how many tasks there are total. You could do this by specific milestone if you'd like, but I'm going to keep it simple for our purposes today to bring this to life. So we're just going to pull from the progress summary tab, and looks like B6 and C6 are what I want here. So I'll just type that in. What that is then going to do is I click save, is it's going to go look for that information right within the spreadsheet. Or again, if you're doing this from a Smartsheet or you're doing this from Asana, you're just going to choose your project and choose the field you want to mark done as. That's then going to bring to life, hey, we're 6 out of 21% of the way there. We're 29% towards our goal here. So that if I'm coming in here from the context of later, even if I'm a leadership team member who's not involved in this project, I can quickly see the progress that we're making without getting hung up on all the details that are related into that project plan, or frankly, just getting lost in a project plan. And our team members can stay right in here working on the project as they're already in here, just providing those updates. Let's say Malik goes in here and this piece is now done. He's updating that to 100% complete. Within Elate, we're going to refresh this on a nightly basis. We can always kick off a sync anytime we'd like. Click for a refresh there. You can now see we're officially a third of the way done here on this project plan. In any route, the context that we're able to get from this is we're starting to marry that data about the tasks that need done. That project needs completed in order for us to see the outcomes that we want, but we want to be able to see how those two work together. And even as I zoom back out here into the hierarchy view, you can see that with that automation, I don't even necessarily need to dive into the objective to see that progress. It's also going to show right here in that hierarchy view. The idea with Elate or with whatever your strategic planning process looks like is that you're getting the right information at the right time so that you can make the right decisions. And so this is how that comes to life. Again, massive kudos go to our product engineering team for all the work they've done on the integrations front, but philosophically, this is how this comes to life and how we start to bring together where we're going, that long-term vision with how the heck we're going to get there, all the things that we need to do day in and day out to move the needle, move the ball forward, and make sure that we can make that progress. I'm going to take a pause here to take a step back from the platform, shift us back into the PowerPoint that we were working from, and realign us on this gap.
Abby, I love the example that you shared there in the platform. Certainly, I really resonated with me in real time a moment ago, seeing the ability to look at where those projects stood from that hierarchy and just being able to make one click and get an immediate pulse check without having to go into the Excel spreadsheet, the Asana board, the Google Sheet, et cetera. And I think that view that you just shared there is particularly powerful. Thanks for pointing that out for those on the call today. Of course, coming back to our bridging the gap visual here, when tactical execution and long-term vision aren't shaking hands, aren't friendly with one another, we get into that moment, as we mentioned earlier, where folks are distracted. They're not sure what that North Star to follow is. That then, of course, opens the door for priority fatigue. When we shift that and bring those two together, bring the tactical and the long-term together, we're afforded the opportunity for a couple of things that really ladder up to that business impact that we've discussed. And first of those that comes to mind for me rather, is clear ownership. Everybody has a good understanding of what they should be focusing on and has an idea and is able to put those blinders on and let other folks focus on what's assigned and owned by them. The next, of course, product of that ownership clarity becomes an intentional focus, both for those individual contributors and the management layer. And really, most importantly, as far as we're concerned in today's context, the strategy and operations leader is able to really focus and be intentional in that focus on the right things, which ultimately drives top-down strategic alignment. From where we come from, where we all as attendees of this session, you are a strategy and operations expert and leader in your own context, in your own business. And Abby and I can both attest, we have a pretty good feeling that what you all are striving for and what we want to help you with is achieving that strategic alignment. Because ultimately, Abby, as you and I both know, strategic alignment ultimately results in informed decisions. And of course, that then leads to better business outcomes. And that becomes that business impact that we're after. Really want to open it up for any sort of additional feedback or color that you'd care to add there, Abby. I know that bridging the gap visual is one that's always been powerful to me, but I'm curious to know if there's anything else in addition to how we've described that and the heck to run from and the heaven to run toward. What else comes to mind for you there in the context of that bridging the gap, Abby?
Yeah, I think so often it's easy to lose sight of why we do strategy, or often then even why we're doing the tactical execution side. Why are we doing those projects? And the purpose of strategy, as I mentioned earlier, is not to get it right from the onset. If you think that you're going to have 100% success rate, I'd love to meet you and learn your trade secrets here. But the reality is our strategy is guiding where we're trying to go. How we get there is going to change. The more we can accept that, the better off we're going to be. And so I think, Zane, as you were hitting on these two components, those informed decisions that lead to better business outcomes, that's what it's about. That's why we do strategy, is we're trying to see the impact on our business, on our customers, on our clients, the folks that we are trying to influence within our sphere. Those are our why. That's the mission. That's the vision of your organization. But you can't get there if your decisions are either being made in silos or being made with not enough information. Or, believe it or not, there is such thing as too much information, too much noise. The moment I see an executive start to dive into a project plan, I get nervous. Not because there's anything in there to hide from, but because it's so easy to get lost in the noise and miss the bigger picture of, wait, I don't actually need to know every single thing that we're doing. I need to know where we're at. I'm sure our own teams feel that way. If I ever start to get into some of our project plans, they're like, no, Abby, keep a step back. Again, not to hide what we're doing, but to make sure that we are keeping it in balance with why we're doing it, where we're trying to go, and then being able to say, hey, we're making great progress on here, but we're not seeing the results that we wanted. Let's talk about what it looks like to pivot. Those are the informed decisions that as leaders and executives, we are tasked with making. And the better information we can get to do those, it will never be perfect. But as much as we can get at the right level, the more equipped we are to making decisions that yield those business outcomes. I know we've talked through quite a bit in this. I'm hopeful that some of what we've shared so far has been helpful and relevant. We'd love to start to shift into this Q&A portion of our time together. And one of the things that we'd love to do is open it up. There's a Q&A opportunity within the Zoom webinar, I believe, or you can drop it in the chat, either one. But we want to spend some time talking about this live. I think this is a topic that's really easy to talk about in theory. and very hard to do in actuality. So we don't want to pretend, oh, you've watched this webinar, you're ready to go do it. This is hard to do. This is very hard, or else we wouldn't even be leading a webinar on it. And so we want to get some real questions. I know Tim, as you all met earlier, had sent out a note prior. So we did get some questions that folks shared ahead of time. I think most of you guys are hopefully able to join. If you're not, you're catching the recording, you'll still hear the answers to those questions as well. But let's take a moment, open it up again. Feel free to drop those in the chat, drop those in the Q&A box, either route, and we'll start to transition this into the fun side of things, the interactive side. Zane and I will pause.
Abby, as we let those questions come in, and of course, I know that we've got a couple of them we can borrow from the front end, thanks to those attendees that have submitted questions on the front end. I think might be appropriate. I think we have a giveaway here today, and some of you may be aware, as a part of the sign up and as a part of today's session, we've actually offered a session. Of course, we'll have an NDA in place and things. We'll make sure all the particulars are above board, but a session, a direct one-to-one strategic planning session to really push the ball even further forward, rather, with Abby, which of course I'm jealous and find a bit of a luck involved there. Excited to announce that the sort of winner, or not the sort of winner, excuse me, the winner of a one-on-one session at no cost with Abby Parker to talk this out and continue that momentum is Deirdre McGinley Geyser. Deirdre, of course, I believe is in attendance today, so we're very excited to announce that. And of course, she joins us from Meals on Wheels. Deirdre, congratulations. You're going to Disney World, or at least the Disney World equivalent in the strategic planning world. We're very excited for you there. And of course, looking forward to circling up with you on the back end of our conversation today to get that coordinated. Thanks to all who entered and opted into that opportunity to meet with Abby. We hope that we're able to make good on that down the line there. So Deirdre, congratulations. Thanks for joining us today. And of course, as Tim just mentioned in the chat, it's a fabulous organization. So we're excited to help you move the ball forward there. Abby, I did have a question at the moment. Maybe I can pass it to you there for the first of these questions. What is the biggest mindset shift that companies and organizations need to make or need to impart in their teams to truly connect day-to-day work to those long-term goals? As our COO, I know you deal with this on a regular basis. I'd love to hear your perspective on that big mindset shift that you see a lot of organizations making that leads to successful execution of their strategic plan.
Yeah. First of all, great question. Also, I don't know if I can live up to the Disneyland expectation here. Deirdre, I'm excited to meet you, but you don't need a fast pass or a wristband. I haven't been to Disney in, I think, since I was a kid. So don't know what that will look like, but either way, excited to meet you.
Got the Elate mouse ears that are just ease, Deirdre. We'll send those to you. Those are free of charge as well. Go ahead, Abby. I apologize.
No, it's a great question. And I want to make sure I'm giving this good thought on the mindset shift, because I actually think even in that question, there's so much there. Often when I think about talking about this in theory and bringing this to life in reality, that biggest challenge happens from that mindset shift not being there yet. And so I love this question, because I think one of the things that hits on is that we have to acknowledge that the way in which we've often done things previously is not going to set us up for success. That this is a change culturally within our business. This is a change in how we operate. And I think the balance here is making sure that we understand that strategy and performance management are not the same thing. And the reason I say that is because often when I think about the connection between these pieces, where things go wrong is when folks believe, for a myriad of reasons, when they believe that they are being tracked and measured based off of the number of tasks they get done in a day. How many things did their name tie to that got crossed off? Or maybe it's not in a day, it's a week, or whatever that looks like. When there's too much focus on that, and we try to drive our strategy from that, what we often see is that we miss the opportunity to make pivots along the way, because no one wants to raise their hand and say the thing I'm doing isn't working. When in reality, when we reframe that as a mindset and we say, hey, our strategy is telling us where we need to go, our tactics, that project plan is the best assumptions that we have at the time on how we're going to get there, but we hold that open-handedly and say, we're not trying to change that daily, but we do expect that there might be things we learn along the way that allow us to change and get there quicker. Or, hey, maybe some things come up that are totally unexpected or outside of your control. I think being able to have that mindset of the path that we want to get there is a dotted line. And we want to follow that path. But when and if we see that the path we intended to take, the project management plan that we laid out, isn't getting us where we need to go or isn't feasible in the time frame that we thought it was going to be, we have to be okay and open to pivot. And I think more often than not, that mindset shift needs to happen at the leadership team first and then trickle down from there. I think often as leaders, we get very set in our ways of, no, this is the plan we did. Let's go ahead and just do exactly what we said we were going to do. But we want to make sure that we're shifting that mindset to, let's not do the things that we always said we were going to do if they're not yielding the results. Bit of a long-winded answer. I know we've got a few Q&As. Tim, I saw you just pop that in the chat as well. So we'll go ahead and dive into more of those, but I love that question. All right, as I was speaking, I was not getting to the Q&A.
I was just going to say, I'll gladly play Vanna White here for you, at least for the time being, Abby. Jonathan had asked, are there any best practices or suggestions for when a single project, a tactic, supports or relates to multiple objectives? What say you, Abby?
Yeah, first of all, hi, Jonathan. Second of all, yes, go ahead and connect them multiple places. We absolutely want to see that information. You're not limited to just saying you can only have that information flow in one place. So yes, go ahead and add that tactic to one of your other objectives. Make sure that you're pulling in the relevant project plan. This is often where I see the milestones break out. Maybe a couple milestones are anchored towards one objective and one towards the other. But yeah, that would be my suggestion there. Zane, I'm gonna flip.
Yeah, please. I was just gonna say, at the risk of putting you on the hot seat, I'd love if you've got one that you want to throw to me. I do have one for you before we close up Q&A, but I'll pass the mic to you first here.
I'm actually going to give this one to you specifically because I do love to live in spreadsheets. So I feel like I can't answer this fully, honestly. But Chelsea, I saw you ask how much data setup / spreadsheet wizardry, which I love, is necessary before you link that in. Zane, I think I'm not saying you are not sophisticated in Excel, but I am saying I know I live in that a lot. I'm going to say you are a good user of Excel or spreadsheets. Zane, curious what your experience has been like with that and with customers in particular.
Very diplomatically said, Abby. I appreciate that. To the question asked, Chelsea, an excellent one. Based on something that Abby said, I guess the short answer is so easy that I could do it. But I think to take that a little bit further into the context, I think that there absolutely, or rather, I know that there is absolutely a range of detail that can be integrated. Abby and I often like to speak with customers and say that if you can create a pivot table of it, or if you can create that visual directly out of Excel, then you very easily and very much so can bring that in to be shown in Elate as well. More than happy if, of course, Chelsea, maybe a conversation offline would be appropriate to continue the progress toward that question and a more realistic and a real world example there. But the short answer there is there absolutely is a range of detail that can be integrated, and the setup, the connection there is one that I do on behalf of or alongside customers on a regular basis. And as Abby mentioned earlier, it doesn't take an Excel mastermind to get that up and running. I'm living proof of that. One question that I wanted to ask, I thought this was pretty interesting, Abby, and it's actually something that came up in a recent conversation with a customer of mine. So I think relevant, hopefully, for a handful of folks in the audience here today. How to surface capacity issues to support prioritization, thinking competing priorities, unplanned work that comes in hot. How do organizations show capacity or capacity constraints? I think prioritization, Abby, is one of those things that is a hot topic right now. We've got something else, another idea that comes in midway. How do we leverage the subject matter we've gone over today? How do we use that to support that prioritization and use that to pivot or persist in other areas of the business? What comes to mind for you there, Abby?
Yeah, the capacity side and that always adding new items. I think they phrased it as, the work that comes in hot. I love that. This is where, to me, priority fatigue comes in. If every other day or every other week, your leadership team is informing you in one way or another that this is the new most important thing, and all of a sudden you have a list of 12 most important things, it is very hard to determine which of those are actually most important. And when you need to do work on both of those, which one comes first? We could probably do a whole other webinar on this with the prioritization matrix, but whether you're in Elate or not, forcing yourself and your team to stack rank your priorities and your objectives is one of the most impactful things you can do to set clarity for your team and to talk about that capacity planning. So often I feel like I see companies make assumptions that they're going to get help from XYZ department to be able to do the thing that they need to do. But that is often implied or assumed and not necessarily agreed upon within those teams. And so we have a whole section in our platform around commitments, and I think that's a big component of it too. But I think again, platform aside, as you're thinking about this philosophically, we need to be able to say what are the most important things. And when that new thing comes in, where does it slot in? That doesn't mean we're only working on one thing at a time, but it does mean we have clarity and we are ruthlessly prioritizing what's most important, what's second most important, third, fourth, etc. I think we've all heard the phrase, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And as much as I love to make everything a priority, there is truth to that statement. I think it's infamous for a reason. So that's one of the things I would think about. There's a lot more to capacity planning than obviously what I'm touching on here, but more often than not, I find that it comes from a lack of clarity of if that new thing is valuable, great, where does it stack up? And then you start to hit on like the pivot or persist, but great, can we keep doing what we're doing or do we need to make some changes and say not now to a few things?
Great feedback there, Abby. Wanted to jump in on another question that Lyndon had asked a little bit more on the external data source side of things, I think. And Lyndon, I'll trust that you'll jump into the chat if I'm misrepresenting there. But Abby, broadly speaking, how much time is typically spent maintaining a project plan to ensure the data quality coming out is meaningful? Obviously, there's an onboarding phase versus a maintenance phase. It would be nice to understand both. Abby, I'm interested to hear how that hits your ears.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting. And I think some of this is going to depend on the size of your organization. So organizations that have a PMO office that are responsible for making sure those projects continue on, they're going to be spending quite a bit more time here. Specifically, those PMO leaders are. If you are part of a smaller organization where maybe a PMO office isn't something that you all have in place, and that's something that the specific person running point on that is owning, generally speaking, it should be routine maintenance to keep that project plan up to snuff, if you will, and making sure that's updated. I would say most project teams do that at least weekly. But however you're going through that and saying, hey, this is now complete, it can be simpler than the example I showed. You could spend a lot less time on it, but that's how often Elate's going to then refresh that information. Again, we're going to do that daily, so that'll continue to come in as you're making those updates. But I think the initial setup piece, as you're thinking about then connecting it to Elate, it's as simple as what I just showed. It's a couple seconds. And then that's on an ongoing basis, it's talking to whatever project plan you already have. So again, it's a little bit going to depend on the size of your team or even the structure of your organization. Ideally, you're spending more time doing the work than you are maintaining the project plan, but I know that's going to vary by organization. All right, we got a little bit more time here. Let's search through a few more questions. Zane, this one might be, I might tee this one up for you if you're open to it. This was one that came in. Oops. Yeah. Okay, this is interesting. It's going back to the cultural piece, but how have you seen your customers recommend their leadership team explain the difference between project execution and project management and strategic planning to their teams? Like, how do you see that, or how have you seen customers successfully communicate that to their teams to create that clarity?
What a great question, and certainly appreciate you throwing that one to me, Abby. It's one that I'm happy to answer directly one-to-one with customers on a pretty regular basis. So glad to paint in broad strokes here. I think particularly for Elate customers, but even outside of that context of folks using Elate and leveraging it for strategic planning, I think really anchoring a given project or anchoring a given work stream to the bigger picture. And I know that we looked at the framework earlier. We can always harken back to that, but thinking of a given work stream or a given project as the result, or rather the producer of an outcome or a producer of the result of that tactic, sometimes it is easy to get lost in the shuffle or to understand where the importance is. And I see successful customers on a regular basis communicating to their constituents internally and their teammates successfully by connecting that to the bigger picture, connecting that to where things stand, oftentimes all the way up to the mission, vision, and values at that maximum. And even at minimum, connecting that to those yearly themes, or of course, those areas of the general business that are higher level in focus. So if I'm thinking about the project that we looked at earlier, that cross-functional project, and a customer or a direct report comes to me and says, hey, I'm having trouble, I'm kind of having a bit of priority fatigue here. Of course, I know all of our direct reports speak in that direct language, but I'm having some priority fatigue here, seeking to get a bit of clarity. Being able to tie that project and tie that initiative back to one of the 3 or 4 or 5 key themes for the year, or connecting that even still up to, this is the value set of our business, this is the mission of our business. I hearken back to something that we do here internally. Our goal, as you know very well, and our mission, Abby, is to really empower strategy and operations leaders to transition internal focus from transactional tasks to purposeful work. So if I'm ever unsure of what I should be doing, or if I'm ever unsure of what I am doing does for our business, being able to hearken back to how that ladders up to one of our values or that mission that I just cited there, and being able to draw that golden thread all the way from the mission of the business down to an individual project. There's so much value and there's so much power in that. And it's something that I've seen work very successfully. And I think that even, of course, we would love to take over the world, or at least the strategic planning world here. But even outside the context of Elate, being able to tie that back to what we've all committed to, what we've all agreed to earlier in the year, earlier in that strategic planning cycle, that's certainly a strong recommendation from where I sit. And I would guess where Abby sits, as we think about helping everyone understand how that project execution and how that strategic planning relates downstream to our teams.
Yeah, I love that. We've got time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I was able to kind of catch up on the Q&A piece there, and looks like one of the questions we had come in from an anonymous attendee, so hopefully you're still on this, whoever you are, was asking for specific examples of how we've seen companies be successful at bridging that gap separate from software or dashboarding solutions, and what are the watchouts that we've seen in situations where this may have gone wrong or not been successful. I'd love to press in on this a little bit, especially areas that we've seen where this hasn't been successful. What are specific areas that we've seen companies, as they're coming to Elate, sharing with us a bit of the scar tissue that maybe they or their organization has from how they used to do this. And a lot of times common themes that we hear in this regard relate to sharing out that strategy at the start of the year, maybe even once a quarter, and not coming back to it and hoping or expecting that their team is going to remember those things all the days, 90 days in between each start of the quarter, 365 days between one year and the next. Where I see this, again, software completely aside, even if you do not have a software, you're not ready for a software, whatever that looks like, the thing I would really encourage and challenge you all as strategy and operations leaders to do is to realize that your team is not constantly thinking about your strategy. You are living in it. That is your job. It's what you're responsible for. They are not living in that. And they will think of it as often as you remind them of it. And often this means bringing this to life in a more regular cadence. That doesn't mean you flash the same PowerPoint, or if you have Elate, you put that up every single day. It means bringing that to life. It means talking about that in your all hands meetings. It means talking about that regularly in your leadership team meetings. It means making sure those leaders are then bringing that back up in their individual team meetings and saying, hey, remember, we're doing this because it gets us closer towards X. Remember, we're doing this because we're trying to do Y this year. We have a number of nonprofit organizations that we're working with right now that are focused on digital transformation. It's very easy to be like, that's an IT thing. They're responsible for that. And it's like, no, we're all a part of that. And reminding folks, hey, we need you to attend this training on this new platform or whatever that is because it connects back to X. I think that's just such a crucial thing that when you aren't reminding folks continually, doesn't mean every moment of every day, but bringing it back up, making it part of the fabric of your culture, that is where we see these pitfalls. It's where folks then, again, the moment that slide disappears and they go to the next one, they're going to forget this if it is not something that is brought back up and talked about regularly at different levels from different voices and made to be something personal that they can connect to and understand. I just wanted to talk through that because, again, obviously you're coming to an Elate webinar. I strongly encourage the use of it, but I recognize that's not where everyone is yet. And I think that there are things you can be doing even without a software that start to lay the framework or even start to kind of plant seeds that you can then reap down the road that allow you to help make that shift culturally and ensure your team can help bridge that gap.
Stellar feedback there, Abby, and always nice to be presenting in the context of a webinar like this and to learn something yourself. So I'll offer some gratitude from across the hallway here, I suppose, as well. But with that in mind, I know we want to make sure everyone has enough time to get to their next conversation. We've got a couple of questions here that we weren't able to get to for time today, but for those that did ask a question, first and foremost, thanks for the engagement and for the extremely thoughtful questions. You can expect us to reach out with some additional context there as well, more in a direct forum. But we really appreciate everybody spending some time with us today on a hopefully sunny Thursday across the board. And Tim, I suppose I've seen you come back off, rather on video there. I'll pass it over to you to go ahead and close us up.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome job, guys. And I'm just realizing I was chatting for a little bit here to only hosts and panelists. I'd like to shout out Andrew. That's a great idea for another webinar. And thank you guys for all joining. The questions that weren't answered, we will reach out and get you an answer on those. We don't want any questions left behind. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Zane and Abby, for leading an amazing session. There's an email address here, Chase, a colleague of mine. If you have any questions on the Elate platform, I would like to meet with a team member. But again, thank you all. Have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Al.